At this time, I would like to call on Vice Moderator Reverend Ashley Rossi to moderate the next portion of our meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It is my deep pleasure to call upon the representatives, our commissioners, to the General Assembly to present their report from the historic 224th gathering of our denomination, the very first to be held virtually. In spite of the incredible logistical and technical challenges they faced, our delegation was instrumental in making sure that more than just the bare minimum of actions were addressed, as was the expectation. Their, dare I say, prophetic leadership made it possible for the people of the assembly to be heard as they spoke in a word, an important word to the church and the world. So we thank you so much, and we look forward to your report.
As we begin our report, we wanted to share different aspects of what we experienced as commissioners to this rather unusual and historic GA. And so each of us who will be speaking has picked a particular area that we wanted to lift up so that you felt like you were a part of what we experienced. And Pam McShane is going to start us off.
Hi, I'm Pam McShane. I am the pastor at Tree of Life Church in Springfield, Pennsylvania, and it was my privilege to be a teaching elder commissioner to the General Assembly this year. In her report to the 224th General Assembly, outgoing co-moderator Ville-Marie Cintron Olivieri quoted a poem from Antonio Machado, which says in part, "Wayfarer, there is no path. You make the path by walking." That poem fits so much of where we are right now as we negotiate the territory of the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and racial injustice. We are in unknown territory. The way we have always done it no longer works. We're making it up the best we can as we go along. No one has the answers. No one has the map. We make missteps and we take detours along the way. We're creating a new path. And we do it best when we walk faithfully with one another and with God. The 224th General Assembly was our first virtual GA, the first national gathering of any denomination. Going into it, some choices were made that profoundly affected the nature of the assembly, particularly the decision not to have committees and the attempt to deal with only essential business, which was defined as the business that needed to be done to keep the denomination and its ministries running as a corporate entity for the next 2 years. These decisions affected the quality of the conversation in our plenary sessions, as pieces that would ordinarily be dealt with in committee were discussed in detail and perfected on the floor. In the meantime, in the world around us, even as plans for the General Assembly were being made, the headlines kept changing. Many of us strongly felt that some kind of action needed to be taken to address the issue of racial injustice, especially in the light of ongoing protests at the time that GA was happening in response to the death of George Floyd and so many other African Americans in our country at the hands of police. I had a privilege of being part of the process as our GA figured out how to do this. I was invited to be the person who placed in nomination the names of Ilona Street Stewart and Gregory Benson to be the co-moderators of the General Assembly. And they were elected on the first ballot. Ilona Street Stewart, who grew up actually here in our Presbytery in Media, is the first Native American to be elected as moderator. She is a ruling elder and synod exec from the Synod of Lakes and Prairies. And Gregory Benson, her co-moderator, is a pastor from Atlanta with a history of activism and civil rights. There was a strong sense that of the candidates, these two were the right people to lead our denomination through this time. I also had the opportunity to sit literally across the table from Megan Acedo, who you'll hear from in a moment, and watched and prayed and supported her as she shepherded a substitute motion addressing our denominational action on racial injustice through a messy and complicated plenary process on the floor of through Zoom, with voices chiming in from all across the country. And in that process, some people were heard, others were not heard. But commissioners, tired from a day of Zooming, did their very best to be faithful and to be just. I learned some things about myself as I helped create this path that we walked on together. I learned that when I'm tired and stressed, I literally do not hear voices that I might otherwise respond to differently. I learned that there are limits to how long I can live on Zoom. And I also learned that it is how amazing it is to be connected as a church, the body of Jesus Christ, across the country, even when we're separated physically by thousands of miles and several time zones. In the end, it's not our physical space, but our faith and commitment as disciples of Christ that hold us together. Together, we as the commissioners of the 224th General Assembly took some steps along that path that we are all creating together. My fellow commissioners will share more about that journey. The thing that I am most grateful for of all is that we were able to walk on this newly emerging path together. Our next speaker will be Eck Gerner.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Eck Gerner. I'm a ruling elder commissioner from the Swarthmore Presbyterian Church. And I was assigned to talk about the technology perspective and also about some commentary on the number of people involved with the process. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, the 224th General Assembly was like none that have come before, meeting digitally across parts of 4 days instead of meeting in person in Baltimore for 9 or 10 full days. The PC U.S.A.'s Office of the General Assembly utilized the website pcbiz.org as the online platform to enable all the GA participants to be fully engaged. All GA participants were required to attend one of the many training sessions on Zoom. Most of the time at these meetings was focused on how to navigate pcbiz.org. The headers on this website's homepage included the ability to access and to follow the GA's business and related supporting data, read the most current text and background of the overtures being presented for consideration, and to vote. At the Presbytery of Philadelphia's Commissioner Orientation meetings, Ruth and Kevin provided us with perspective, wisdom, and sage advice about how a GA typically has worked in the past and what most likely we would expect from this unprecedented and historic virtual meeting. Ruth and Kevin explained why it was important for all of us to be together. They, along with Reverend Greg Klimovitz and Reverend Ryan Bolson of First Presbyterian Church in Ambler, determined that this church would be an excellent site for all of us to be in one location and one where we could all exceed all social distancing requirements. Ruth and Kevin explained why it was important for all of us to have all the proper equipment with us so we would be able to more fully enjoy the experience. This included having multiple electronic devices, such as a laptop to view the GA meeting live on Zoom, a second device such as an iPad that would be set up just for voting, a handheld phone such as an iPhone with WhatsApp on it so we would be able to communicate in real time with each other, and plug in headset earphones or earbuds so that the cumulative sound would not be distracting to the others. I note that due to some potential bandwidth issues that arose after the GA's opening worship service, half of the group went to Presbytery's home office and the other half stayed in Ambler. A brief perspective on about some of the people who were involved. So this is to put it all into context for you. So PC U.S.A.'s GA represents more than 1.4 million people worldwide. Presbytery of Philadelphia has about 25,000 members and is one of the PC U.S.A.'s 170 presbyteries. The Presbytery of Philadelphia also belongs to the Synod of the Trinity that has 16 presbyteries in it with about 138,000 members. And this covers all of Pennsylvania and West Virginia and part of southeastern Ohio. The General Assembly invited the Presbytery of Philadelphia to send 9 commissioners to the GA, 4 ruling elder commissioners, 4 teaching elder commissioners, and 1 young adult advisory delegate. At the GA, the commissioners were connected across 6 time zones. Think about that, 6 time zones. With 56% of them from the Eastern time zone, the next largest group was from the Central time zone with 26%. Of the ruling elder commissioners and teaching elder commissioners in attendance at this GA, 68 was the most common age. Of the 4 classifications of advisory delegates, the majority of them were young adult advisory delegates, like our good friend Will. We were advised that there would be many opportunities for us to participate in future General Assemblies, such as being on a GA committee. However, a person is elected only once as a GA commissioner. All of us greatly appreciated and thoroughly enjoyed this truly meaningful opportunity to be actively involved with the 224th General Assembly, being with each other, and representing all of you. This concludes my report. Thank you. Megan will be next.
Good morning, all. I am Megan Acedo, a member and the clerk of session at Beacon Church and a ruling elder commissioner to the 224th General Assembly. I had a bit of a unique privilege of being part of the only working committee of this General Assembly, the Committee on Business Referrals, or Committee 01 for short. It was made up of the moderators and vice moderators of what would have been all 12 assembly committees. I won't spend a long time on this, but I think it's important to mention because it gave me, and ultimately as a result, our entire Philadelphia delegation, a bit of a behind the scenes view of how this assembly was being formed as it happened. It also contributed significantly to me having the opportunity to bring significant amendments to an item of business ultimately passed by the Assembly, item 0029, titled "On the Church in This Moment in Time, the Sin of Racism and a Call to Action." Our committee, Committee 01, met for the first time in early May for training. At that point, we were really only dealing with COVID-19 in the forefront of our experience, and we were just learning of the format the Assembly might take. The Committee on the Office of the General Assembly, or COGA, was the group tasked with making recommendations around the business which would be considered at this Assembly and the business which would be referred to the 225th General Assembly in 2022. Ultimately, items for consideration at this Assembly were considered core and critical to keeping the PC-USA up and running until 2022, essentially budgetary and institutional items. Those recommendations then came to Committee 01 for referral to the Assembly for its action. While not ideal in so many ways, and as someone who's been involved in General Assembly for nearly 2 decades, I was grieved by the idea of not being together in Baltimore, but we were moving along. The process was moving along. We were adjusting to the realities of COVID-19 in some ways at least. And then we watched in horror as George Floyd was murdered. And then we watched as the movement for racial justice and for Black Lives Matter that has swept the nation in a markedly different way this time also swept over the workings of the Assembly. COGA began to receive comments from concerned individuals, committees, and other affiliated groups expressing their concerns about how the PC-USA in general and the 224th General Assembly in particular might speak to this moment in time. COGA developed the original draft of item 0029, which also came to Committee 01 for its referral to the Assembly. On a personal note, while really grateful for the start, I found COGA's statement to be lacking in conviction and with enough actionable suggestions. I thought that we could frame it more strongly. Many assemblies before us have made statement after statement about racial justice. We have said a lot in the past, and yet we still have so much more work ahead of us. So I began to work with some fellow committee members to develop amendments to the statement, and then during GA, connected with other writing teams from the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship and Presbyterian Health Education and Welfare Association. Pulling in some suggestions from these groups, I was able to present, as Pam mentioned, a substitute motion which included those proposed changes on the Zoom floor of plenary. After more than 2 hours, messy hours of work and discussion on this item, more than any other item of business considered by the Assembly, the amended statement was approved with an 85% affirmative vote. It is perhaps the piece of writing I am proudest of in my entire life for what it calls out, what it calls us to, and how it challenges us to actually be the good news in the world that we claim to bring. I wish I could say that it was a major victory and everything since then has been wonderful, but the reality is much more nuanced. Some comments and actions taken by this General Assembly, even in relationship to this item, which calls racism a sin and calls us out for our complicity in it, were indeed racist and based in white supremacy and white supremacist structures. And yet, I and my fellow commissioners from Philadelphia will be pushing us as a presbytery and within our congregations to begin to take action by starting with recommendations outlined in this statement. Vijay Aggarwal, our wonderful moderator, reached out to me to get a copy of the item so that we could circulate it to the collegium, and I hope that we'll be taking initial steps there to bring more items for action to the entire presbytery. I'll conclude by saying that one of the most poignant moments of the Assembly was at the very end, participating in the silent vigil of 8 minutes and 46 seconds that was outlined as part of the changes to item 0029, designed as a, quote, symbolic representation in solidarity with our BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color siblings, and of corporate lament and personal introspection of our complicity in perpetuating systemic racism and racial injustice, end quote. The vigil wasn't perfect, far from it. And if you were following along, you might have seen some of the reasons it wasn't perfect. But to witness nearly 700 people on Zoom in reflection and prayer was powerful. While I was in vigil and in prayer, I scrolled through the screens and saw people praying and reflecting and sitting and thinking. So my prayer now is that we move from lament to repentance, to hope, to action, that we take our prayers to the streets and the reflection to our own selves, to interrogate our biases and our complicity, and that we do something about it, that we take action. My deepest prayer is that all of you will join us, that you'll listen to the particular call God has for you in this area, because we are each called to something unique and something particular around working towards racial justice, and that you will then step out in faith and take action with us. Our next speaker will be Lois.
Good morning. The experience of GA was unique because of its technological limitations and opportunities. one of the things that was very true was that we had some opportunities outside of our meeting space to really put hands and feet on the ground. On the 20th of June, we had an opportunity to experience the Poor People's Campaign, which is a national call to moral revival. And in that opportunity, there was an open letter that it listed out those things that we could be addressing as our moral obligation, moral revival, to bring the word of the Lord back into our practice, to adhere to things that were in the Confessions of 1967 and the Bellhart Confession, and to really gather together online powerfully to resonate with people who are vulnerable. And we had an opportunity individually and collectively to sign on to the open letter. You have an opportunity to Google that if you like. Those of us who decided to sign on individually may also choose to make a contribution to the Poor People's Campaign so that we can address poverty, because part of the plight of low-income people is being addressed by the Poor People's Campaign. And along with that, to a call to action about reducing voter suppression and to encourage people to participate in the census, to also give credence and put our hands and feet to work. There was also an opportunity to be joyful about a program that's going on in Baltimore. And in Baltimore, they have a Youth Rising Coalition that involves people who are between the ages of 14 and 24 in entrepreneurship, to assist them in the work of building small businesses, and to do that in coalition with other organizations, so that it's, in the words of Maya Angelou, tell them we are rising. And we are trying to address poverty in our community by putting ourselves to work. So we had an opportunity to join in hands and feet with that particular experience, and not only watch it, but contribute to it and so forth. We also had an opportunity to really delve into the Word. And we had two opportunities for Bible study. And while we were also dealing with the business at hand at GA, and the marvelous work that Megan just told you about, and the ways that we did it that Eck told you about, we actually got to pray and to look at Scripture to guide us, to guide our feet while we run this race. And that the Bible study was meaningful. It was a call to action that we always have had and may not have used in this way of really calling us not only to lament, but to repent, and that our hope that was given to us in our scriptural lessons to move us to action. So in that way, there were a number of opportunities that we had to really put hands and feet to the work of God. And our next speaker is Will.
Hi, everyone. It was an honor and privilege to represent this presbytery as the Young Adult Advisory Delegate for this General Assembly. So thank you for the opportunity. Considering our current state, I think General Assembly did very well in keeping the Young Adult Advisory Delegates engaged during this period. I know for the commissioners that this General Assembly was isolating without the connections that usually develop with commissioners from other presbyteries. And for the young adults, while I doubt our experience was the same as in years past, we had a very active group me and group chat, and 4 meetings, 2 that were held before General Assembly and 2 in the midst of General Assembly, that truly helped us to feel like individual participants in the, not to help us not feel like individual participants in this process. Along with these group meetings, we also had small groups to reflect on the Bible study that was held in the middle of GA. And I hear that normally the YADs are a tight-knit group, and this seemed to hold especially true for this General Assembly as well. During our meetings, we had the opportunity to hear directly from our stated clerk, Reverend Dr. J. Herbert Nelson, along with the candidates for moderator. In addition, we were provided insight on the parliamentary voting process and the Roberts Rules of Order. Maybe too much insight, but I guess that's the nature of the parliamentary process. So. The ads also got to participate in a wonderful Instagram live event put on by the Youth Rising Coalition, as Lois just spoke of, which is a group of 14 to 24-year-old entrepreneurs and youth who believe in creative solutions to job creation in Baltimore. We had the opportunity to see many of these youth show off their talents in song and spoken word. And it was a great opportunity to see the incredible work that they're doing, hear their dreams and aspirations, which are all driven by an immense passion. I'm also blessed to be a part of this presbytery. Unlike some young adults, I felt very connected with our presbytery during this time. I felt cared for, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. Between the Philly Presbytery group chat and the group chat with the YADs, I felt informed and received a lot of help and guidance for more confusing topics and some of the minutiae of GA, which there was certainly a lot of, it felt like, this time around. Overall, I was impressed by the General Assembly. I was impressed by the scale of our church, the number of members we have spanning the country, and the way our church has shifted and changed over the course of time. It can be a little overwhelming to be hit in the face with the governance of U.S.A. and the rules of General Assembly, but I was amazed as I reflected back on these rules and norms that were established long ago and how they have led our church to where we are today, allowing us to adapt to how we hear God calling us and adapt to these changing times. General Assembly really reminded me that we have a church filled with impassioned people doing their best to follow Christ's call in their life. And this includes a strong contingency of young adults. If we take these 85 voices as representative of young adults in our church across the country, there is a desperate call for a world to reflect the love of Christ, something I think we are all feeling right now. But while we are all imperfect individuals, through the Holy Spirit, we were able to come together to make a more perfect whole. And I think that's something that we continually do, and was a really great reminder for me. So now I think I'm passing it over to Todd.
Hi, I'm Todd Stavrakos. I'm pastor at Gladwin Presbyterian Church. It was a pleasure to serve with my fellow commissioners. I learned so much from them as we discussed many of the issues that were in front of us, as well as many of the issues that we were not going to be addressing. From my experience of being an observer at previous GAs and then the experience of being commissioner at this GA, I came away wondering what the future holds for our denomination in terms of how we are structured. Obviously, we were able to do a lot with technology, and I wonder what the feasibility is in terms of future uses of such technology to improve our GA experience. But as we gathered during the two pandemics, and as we were sort of being asked not to really deal with other issues, but just the essential items, it left a gaping question of who are we as church if our essential items just boil down to institutional or constitutional issues, and if we are not addressing the issues that Christ brings before us. How do we as a denomination adapt ourselves to adjust in a time where things move faster, where congregations who are on the ground actually doing the work of Christ, how do we empower them so they are not held back by a national structure that seems to consolidate resources at a higher level? How do we create networks of congregations to link hand in hand and get back to a stronger sense of connectionalism? It was truly enheartening to see how Megan and others that she had met through her process of being involved in the work of O1 to structure a far more appropriate overture to deal with the racism in our world. And so there are definite signs of how technology, even in the midst of a pandemic, can help us be connected. And I think we as a denomination need to explore this in more tangible and realistic ways. There's no reason why we need to be waiting every 2 years to do something. Many of us, when we review the actions that have been punted for the next GA, notice that there's really not much new in these overtures that we keep bringing forward. So why do we wait for 2 years? And so I'm going to end there because my brother Lloyd, I think, is going to preach a little bit to us. So Lloyd, over to you.
Thank you, Todd. My name is Lloyd Higgins. I'm an elder at the Oxford Presbyterian Church, serving there for a number of years. I am excited about having been part of this wonderful group to represent Philadelphia, the GA. My excitement comes in 3 areas. One, of discovering things. I spent a lot of time discovering the writings, the rationale, the documentation, the history of resolutions and motions, and that excited me. But having discovered all that stuff, I then start to learn some things. And what I learned is that some of these same proposals or propositions or items of concern, notwithstanding the 2 pandemics going on now, we discussed them before at General Assembly. Curiously, I pulled up the summary of the 2018 General Assembly, which was the 223rd General Assembly. And what I found out is that the same issue concerning injustice, racial inequality, not having pulpit supplies in Afro-American communities and churches, they discussed that in 2018. And I'm saying to myself, okay, we have a denomination at the end of 2019. It was I think 1.3 million members. We have 972,000 are white, 37,000 Asian, 48,000 are Black, Afro-Americans, Latinos, and Hispanics, 17,000. But when I start to look at that document and start to research and read and listen, I'm asking myself a question. It's good to be part of this particular church. I like how they document information. They get an A+ in documenting, they get an A+ in researching, they get an A+ in filing, they get an A+ in putting in archives. So for me, what I gathered, what I gained from the assembly, I saw the rules of Robert's rules at its best. I saw rules as being a stifling effect on making things happen. And Todd alluded to that. So I came away from this GA excited about learning more about our denomination, seeing my weakness in not understanding how the rules can be used to muzzle and to deflect and to avoid action. And I said to myself, what do I do next? So my experience has been wonderful. Wonderful at the personal level in terms of getting all that information. Wonderful at learning about how the denomination works, but at the same time, very saddened by the inaction over the years of some of these same issues that have been reproduced again. So my prayer for myself, and I love the other 8 persons I work with, my prayer for myself, my church, my personal church, Oxford, the Presbytery Philadelphia, and the denomination, is that we will find time to remove these stifling processes that do not allow the action to be seen in the congregation at the witnessing site. As a matter of fact, I asked the moderators a question, and I asked them, what are they going to do in terms of providing human and financial resources to bring about a level of effectiveness at the congregational level? And I asked them to reflect on Galatians 3, verse 28, when you talk about there was no Jews or Greeks, there was no economic disparity, and there were no gender. How do you make that happen so that the church in the community can feel the effects of an organization, a church with 1.3 million members, broke up in so many parts of this country and the world, that we can say without any ambiguity that we are the hands and the feet of God. To end, I wanted to just uplift a note I saw this morning as we heard the death of John Lewis. And it struck me what he said. He said here in 2017, he said we have to stop being quiet for too long. He said there comes a time when you have to say something. You have to make a little noise. You have to move your feet. And this is the time. My prayer also is that our faithfulness to the Lord Jesus Christ, as reflected in this beautiful song, Great is Thy Faithfulness, I hope it will remind each one of us in this presbytery that our work is not completed by the documentation, the archiving of these fantastic resolutions, but that it must reflect itself in how many people we have bring to Christ and guaranteeing equality of opportunity for every member of this body. It was a pleasure being part of this group and being one of your representatives to this particular General Assembly. And I look forward with excitement to be part of any group within this presbytery that want to further all the thoughts and all the decisions and all the activities that were discussed at this General Assembly. May God continue to bless each one of us. Thank you very much.
That concludes our report. And I really, really, truly want to thank all my brothers and sisters that I've spent time with as we've gotten through this historic GA. And thank God that you serve with me and I serve with you. So blessings and thank you to the Presbytery for this opportunity to serve on your behalf.
Thank you so much, Commissioners. Lloyd, I'd like to invite you to preach at Carmel anytime. That is a message we all need to hear. We love making up fancy bylaws and big documents, but let's put it into action. Could not have said it better.